Welcome to today's meeting. Please note this is a public meeting. Members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. The meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is on the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphones when speaking. So, welcome to this evening's meeting. Slightly delayed, but can we start with appointments of substitutes?
Yes, thank you. Joe Hodges is here tonight for Councillor Denham. Chair Mitchell is paid. You're in the chair as vice chair at this moment.
Are there any declarations of interest? No public participation. So look at the minutes from the previous meeting of July. Can I sign those? Anything to raise on those at all? Got two meetings actually, the 5th of July and the 26th of July. Both okay? Thank you. So that's the staff absence report then. I believe this is with you.
Thank you, Chair. This report was requested by members of the joint in response to a discussion we were having at that committee about Council's workforce experience of COVID. So this is just a data report, really. Instances of COVID in the workforce since the pandemic began in 2020. And we've presented the data through a number of different lenses, looking at total number of self-isolations, periods where we've had a spike in absences during the workforce, and breaking down the difference between confirmed or suspected COVID obviously the committee will be aware that as the pandemic was, taking hold, government guidance was settling down. Different measures were put in place throughout the pandemic, and so some of the reporting is reflective of those changes. So, for example, the committee will note that there are a couple of spikes in terms of absences, which would correlate with periods where, colloquially, it was being called the pingdemic. The app was pinging a lot of people, but equally in the early days, it was necessary to take a very precautionary approach to self-isolation. And as we and other organisations settled into a much clearer pattern of the risk we were managing, we were able to reduce the numbers of people given time. What I would say overall, and the covering report notes this, is that the council, obviously, with a workforce of our number, necessarily experienced a number of instances of workforce, but we have not had what would be regarded by public health as an outbreak. We have had isolated. And the other point I would want to draw to the committee's attention is that in the very, very early stages, we decided to introduce a COVID staff policy as a positive and protective measure to provide clarity on how staff should perform their duties to ensure essential services were met, but also look after their health and well-being and make sure that we weren't exposing other colleagues to unnecessary. An example of that is that the council resolved quickly to move to 100% pay, sickness pay, so that we didn't have a scenario where people were feeling that perhaps they needed to work even sick. So we have tracked our absence rates throughout the pandemic, and I'm pleased to report that the sickness absence we have had has not overall caused any significant business contribution. Clearly, we're still managing this risk, and we manage it at a corporate and a service level, and the impact on sickness absence is discussed very regularly at management team meetings. Happy to take any.
Thanks, Sean. Have you got a thingy, Chris? Yeah, I mean, the reason for the joint consultative asking for the information was really so that we knew it was logged somewhere safely and that members had seen it. There was no question of a critical approach to it. In fact, I think quite the reverse. It was we wanted to ensure that we'd behaved reasonably, which we felt we had during the time, and also the fact that there had been the ability to continue and cover services when there had been any particular issue. Anybody got any questions? Mr. Hodges.
Thank you. As someone who's brimming with antibodies at the moment, because in the last 4 days, I've had my COVID booster and my flu jab, I wonder if we have a particular attitude towards staff who might not have had any vaccination. I mean, sometimes there are very legitimate reasons because of people's health, but sometimes it's people who just choose not to have a vaccination. Do we have any policy as far as?
Through you, Chair. The committee will note that in the covering report, we refer to the COVID staff policy and then the COVID updated staff policy. So we reissued the policy in July. And when we did that, we were obviously cognizant of the vaccination rollout programme at that time. Taking advice and looking at the position in our sector, we were clear that we could not compel staff to have the vaccination or compel staff to tell us if they'd had the vaccination. That's the current legal. The council, on the other hand, has been actively involved in promoting the vaccination clinic here downstairs, as settings that we've been actively involved, and in the MD's message, we've clearly celebrated the success of the vaccination. But we've made it clear to managers that the choice of having the vaccination is a local. And then the last point I'd make is, as a statutory service ourselves, we've had to keep business continuity going. We've had to prioritise that. So we haven't, where we've managed health issues, it's been on the basis of somebody who would have a qualifying disability and we'd need to make reasonable adjustments for that, instead of taking a more global view that we've followed all the best practice guidance around social distancing and good hygiene. But we were able to move to different ways of working when the vaccination program further forward, and we have changed some of our mitigation measures. The fact that the majority of our workforce have now had the opportunity to be vaccinated, but we don't intend to do any more to ask where the workforce is.
Okay, are we happy with that report then? Great, thank you very much. Then we'll move on to item 6, which is the hybrid working policy, which in some ways arises out of that ways of working that we've had over the previous 18 months. You're not, David.
Wrong one, thank you. I'll just say a few words and I'll hand over to Sian, who's done all of the donkey work on this, and I wouldn't want to steal her thunder. I think what I would like to say is that, as everybody knows, we've done very well, really, over the last 18 months, 2 years, in terms of business and continuing to deliver services across all areas of the business. During that time, a number of staff have been able to work, but also a large number of staff have remained on site in offices, the street scene, refuse collection, bereavement service, and from time to time the housing team have all had to be on site with members of the public and to deliver front-facing public services. And I think in considering this policy we've looked very carefully at the various cases in terms of options. And I think from my perspective, I just want to say that we are a public-facing organisation. We do provide a service to the public, and there is no doubt in my mind that that service best provided when we spend a considerable majority of the time, in fact, office-based. I've been talking to the staff that have been returning to the office, and we were reflecting on the fact that going back 2 years now, when we had our first floods, how well everybody had responded, and you will know that staff come in at weekends and man emergency stations in the Guildhall over weekends and to cover the flood activities. And the member of staff said to me that her view was that the reason why we have such a success in those sorts of things, why there is such strong camaraderie amongst the staff, is because everybody knows everybody, and we have very strong relationships built on face-to-face meetings. And we don't think that if staff had never met and if staff had always been based at home, we would have that level of camaraderie, and we'd have that level of agility, flexibility, however you want to call it, when it comes to responding to emergency situations. So having said that, the policy, the draft policy in front of you today states that we, under normal working conditions, in a normal working week, we will expect officers to be in the office for the majority of time. And we've kept it very simple. There are not lots and lots of forms to fill in. There are not lots of checklists to complete. We expect staff to work with their managers and deliver those front-facing services, as I say, with the majority of time being based in the office. So that's the overarching principle, really, and part of my feelings, at least, behind the reason why we've come to this conclusion. I'll hand over to Sian now, who will go through policy in a bit more detail. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Yes, I'm sure the committee have had the opportunity to review it for themselves. So I suppose I just want to pull out a couple of points, which is that the policy is proposed to replace our existing agile policy, which doesn't look very agile now. Look at it with the benefit of what we've learned in the last 18 months. The council's invested in technology to ensure that businesses can work effectively from different. Technology includes hardware and software and network upgrades, all manner of things like that. As David has said, we very much have our overarching principle that our place of work is council premises. We have a number of different premises but that the council recognises. Productive. I'd also just like to point out, I think, an interesting angle on equalities that, again, is being pulled out in national surveys, which is that the demographic that reports that they struggle the most with a whole working environment is the younger workforce. And that's being pulled out in a number of surveys. Again, I'm speaking anecdotally, but the gist of it is that if colleagues don't get the opportunity to sit together and learn from each other, do miss out on some professional and social networking development that they get through work. But I think another interesting angle for me, qualities, is that people do talk about benefit of flexibility around work-life balance. So clearly it is important that we have a satisfied and well-motivated workforce. So we want to take forward some of the benefits of the last year, not just go back to where we were before the pandemic. And all of that is set out in the policy itself. It attempts to strike a balance between flexibility and clear rules, because clearly we do need rules and rules of fairness. And there is an overarching principle that the arrangements must suit the needs of the business. Members, you'll note that the policy is being recommended to you to be adopted for an initial period of 12 months, then be reviewed, taking account of feedback from managers, employees, members, trade unions, customers, stakeholders. I just want to draw out that the consultation we had with the trade unions was positive, exception to those colleagues here who attended the consultative committee and affirm that the trade unions don't have an objection to our policy. They just want to be satisfied that it will be properly implemented. Technology will be there to support people to work in a really effective way. So that was the main feedback we had, and that was really helpful. And we are cognizant that improvements. So overall, the policy sets out principles. From principles, then obviously we can develop further guidance if needed. The policy sets out some clear expectations about working at houses versus working at home or off-site, and it places a responsibility on employees to complete a home working assessment when working off-site, but their postural arrangements, DSE arrangements, factory to the council, and that obviously is the homework. That we make general provision for people to work at home, but we will only make specific arrangements where by medical. An example being that some colleagues work on very specific pieces of software in their roles. Some people obviously for particular chair. Specific and there's some references in there to the modern world we find ourselves in about ensuring. Learned through Zoom and Teams that there are different things that you need to consider when you're working in a remote. Clearly, there will be some more work to do on information governance policies now. And then finally, the other point I want to make is that we're very clear that at the moment, the council doesn't have core hours. What we have is contractual hours, and in each given day, it's for managers to make sure that there's appropriate levels of team cover. What this policy says is that all employees must adopt a working pattern across the week, which fits with the usual working hours of other colleagues across the council. This is so that colleagues are available to take calls, generally respond to each other, promptly join meetings. It leaves open for heads of service to set further specific requirements for their teams to ensure each working day there is a sufficient level of cover and colleagues. We have in the policy emphasised the benefits of spending time team collaboration. And there is some work that the organisational development is really useful for people. I think that's all I want to say in terms of covering the policy.
Okay, thanks both. Key question. Stanley.
Thanks, Chair. The point about the Council's information security standards, I kind of think, we're moving into a different world now, and clearly hybrid working will play a major part in all our lives going forward. Is there any sense that the existing legislation surrounding this needs to be enhanced, tightened up, whatever, or are we content that actually it's good in this new environment?
Through you, Chair. I think the legislation is more than adequate. I think one of the difficulties with information governance, though, is it can become a bit of an industry that you get these very, very large documents telling you exactly how you should process information. It becomes a little bit unwieldy, and I think that we have to go back to risk mitigation. What are the main risks of working in different ways? It's data loss, really. So that we've got a really accessible policy that everybody understands about hardware and software data loss, data things that perhaps we didn't have to think about before, like not being overheard. So for me, it's about making sure that there's a really up-to-date and useful bit of policy and guidance for officers. The legislation is what it is.
I just wondered if there was any sense that the last 18 months, are we going to look at it and think we need to reflect? Are there specific lessons that we can learn? I'm not talking about individuals specifics in the sense of what could be identified, in the public domain, but, do we have to take that opportunity to reflect on it? And, if such a thing as a protocol emerges from this, what will inform that?
Through you, Chair. Yes, I absolutely agree. And one good example of that is that it's a multi-channel experience these days for all of us. You've got your Zoom, you've got your Teams, you've got your chat, you've got your, not in the context of work, but domestically, you've got things like WhatsApp. It's there are an awful lot of channels of information. That's one thing we've talked about, is being very clear. And what information. That's a good example of that.
Firstly, my apologies for being late, unfortunately. There seems to be a serious accident down by the church, which has delayed me. I have two questions, if I may, three actually. The first one is around IT and the delivery of IT to enable people to work from home. Understanding there will always be an exception for people who have specific requirements. Do we have within the council an absolute nailed down understanding of what that standard package is, whether it's a laptop, whatever it is, whether it's a screen size, so that we don't end up having lots of people with different scopes of equipment and someone saying, well, he's got a 24-inch screen, why haven't I got one of those? Because I'm having to work from a laptop. First question.
Shall I go first?
And there's a cost associated with that, obviously, but yeah.
The requests are all being managed centrally, so there is a common standard being applied, and therefore there is a standard offer insofar as laptop monitor if it's required.
And you sort of touched on it a bit. It's about training. I mean, we used to get it annually at one of the companies I work with. Particularly when you're on the phone or talking in a public place, because we deal with very sensitive people sometimes with sensitive information, and delivering that training so that people do understand that when they're in Costa Coffee, sat with a laptop, quite rightly working, and without realising it, they're talking about something that we don't want the public to know about, whether it's confidential, it's commercial in confidence, whether it's that. Training people on that, I think delivering some training would be a real benefit, because it doesn't come naturally. And I know I find myself sometimes in my previous jobs sat at an airport talking and suddenly going, actually, people sat behind me. So is that being considered?
Yeah, yes, Chris. I think, and I think it's something that we have to do constantly. It's not something that you can do once and then think, right, everybody knows what to do. We are constantly, for example, running phishing exercises on the system to see how many people are, open silly emails, sort of stuff. When it comes to behaviours in public spaces and meetings, I think there's a couple of points I would make there. One, obviously, you need to choose your location very carefully. And if, like, for example, I met some developers today, I wouldn't meet them in Costa Coffee because I don't know who's sitting behind me. We meet in the office. If it's a general chat and we want to get some fresh air, then it's different. I think also one of the other things that we've picked up is it's around professional demeanour on camera, and people have got says he's sitting here suited and booted, but I think sometimes people have got a bit overly casual on camera for some meetings, and you need to know your audience and you need to know your position and what you're doing, because again, if you're meeting external stakeholders, it's no different, for me to be meeting them in the office, meeting them on a Teams meeting, and that, if you've never met anybody before, that initial impression, it's very important. And I think we need to do it's a constant exercise in answer.
Thank you. And my final one, which is, I think without a shadow of doubt, going to be the most challenging thing. management and reporting on individuals, it's human nature. If you see someone 5 days a week, you tend to know them a bit better. How are we going to ensure that the management, when they're reporting, don't, for no fault of their own, human nature, someone who might be massively efficient, but for whatever reason is only in the office 2 days a week, it's just something I think we probably need to be cognizant of, to tell the managers that they need to be cognizant of. So, because the last thing we want is someone who's done really, really well, not get promoted or not get a grade and come and go, look what I've done, but there'd be no audit trail to say, well, actually, I have seen you 5 times. It's just something that sat in the back of my mind going, that's a challenge.
Yeah, Sean might want to add to this, but I think you're absolutely right. I think that the challenge of managing people very well when sometimes people are not always in the office is really, really important. Like, for example, at the moment, all teams are planning specific days when they're all in. And they will all come in a certain day of the week, at least, you know, where they're all in on one day. So they may be on other days, but not all together. So we're making, and that's just good management practice. And so, for example, the development management team are all in tomorrow. And so I'm coming in to see them, to join the team meeting, just to say hello. I don't know whether that's good or bad from their perspective, but they're getting it, you know. So I think, you know, evolving those good practices and sharing those good practices, and also from a senior management perspective, inviting yourself to the next team meeting. And if there's a hurried scurrying around to organise a team meeting because the MD wants to come to the next one, you know that there wasn't one planned. It's not difficult. So, you know, you can do these things, but we just have to be very vigilant and share good practice and build on that. I don't know if Sean wants to add anything to that.
Thanks. I mean, it's also actually about the staff knowing where to go for their support. It's not just about management down, it's about the way in which staff receive work within a team as well. Councillor Hodgson.
Mine's more about work-life balance. Working from whether or not, because they might have got a project or something on, work well into the evening or something like that. But and what do we about sort of work-life balance? No, I'm not very well explaining, but.
Through you, Chair, that is a really important point, Councillor Hodgson, and it's a point that's going around the country. In fact, it's going around other countries. This phrase has arisen, which right to disconnect. So at 7.6, every right to disconnect. In evenings and weekends, officially on duty. Equip people to have that confidence. Equip them that everybody has. Really, depending on what your role is within the organisation. We've put it front and centre. Feature of the work.
And what about something like that? Working day and what do we feel about they're on the lunch break and dog or something like that? Yeah, they still.
We are doing a piece of work about customer service standards at the moment. Well, we've got a position. Putting out to all staff. When we say customer service, obviously, key customers. So it's really important that we have response. It's obviously really, we're very exposed. We would expect a high degree of response. But within that, obviously, at the moment, we haven't felt necessary to code. Really, members welcome your feedback on that. At the start of the policy, it said, keep this under review and look at next time.
So in a way, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that actually maybe sometimes don't want rely on measured response and that.
Through you, Chair. Yes, although I suppose what we would say is, I suppose experience is that staff know their roles well and their key customers well, and it would be difficult for us to set a corporate standard which might not be realistic. It's that quality conversation, I guess, in the one-to-one about whether workloads are excessive or individual contacts and customers are placing too much of a challenge. Otherwise, we do expect staff to sort of manage their customer responsiveness themselves, because sometimes it will be necessary to return. It won't.
Okay. And if you're talking about members, there's a very clear code of conduct in the way in which we behave. Okay, are we happy with that recommendation then? We can agree that policy review 12 months. Brilliant. Thank you very much. My agenda's run out, so I'm not sure what's next, but it might be AOB. There doesn't seem to be any. Okay, in that case, thank you for your attendance, and we will see you shortly. Bye-bye.